Hello everyone, welcome to the channel. Before we start today's case, I want to ask for your support by subscribing to my channel. Your support is very important to me, so please subscribe to follow more cases and encourage us. Click the like button and let's get into the case. The morning sun cast long shadows across Clearwater Beach as Ryan Mitchell walked along the shoreline. At 32, he had the lean, muscular build of someone who spent more time outdoors than in an office. His sandy brown hair was perpetually tousled by the ocean breeze, and his skin had taken on the golden hue of someone who called Florida home. Ryan had moved to the Gulf Coast 5 years ago from Chicago, drawn by the promise of endless summers and the soothing rhythm of the tides. He'd fallen in love with the ocean, its vastness, its mystery, and the sense of freedom it gave him. Today was Ryan's day off from the beachfront restaurant where he worked as a manager. The early hour meant the beach was nearly deserted. Just a few dedicated joggers and a couple of elderly shell collectors dotted the white sands. This was his favorite time, when the world felt like it belonged only to him and the sea. He stopped to check his watch, 5:45 a.m. Perfect time for his morning swim. Ryan glanced down the beach toward the lifeguard station, which wouldn't be manned for another 2 hours. A red flag fluttered in the morning breeze, indicating dangerous swimming conditions. But Ryan considered himself a strong swimmer, and the water looked calm this morning, the waves gentle and inviting. He'd seen the local news report last night about a fisherman spotting what might have been a bull shark a few miles down the coast, but shark sightings weren't uncommon in these waters. Besides, he reasoned, the chances of an encounter were minimal. He placed his towel, phone, and water bottle on the sand, well above the tide line. With practiced efficiency, he pulled his rash guard over his head, adjusted his swim trunks, and slipped on the swimming goggles hanging around his neck. He took a moment to stretch his shoulders and legs before walking toward the water. The first touch of the Gulf of Mexico against his feet sent a pleasant chill up his spine. The water temperature was perfect, around 78 degrees, cool, enough to be refreshing but warm enough to be comfortable. Ryan waded in until the water reached his waist, then dove forward into an oncoming wave. Emerging on the other side with a satisfied gasp, he began to swim parallel to the shore with strong, measured strokes, settling into the familiar rhythm that cleared his mind and energized his body. About half a mile from his starting point, Ryan paused to tread water and catch his breath. The shore was still clearly visible, though the few people on the beach now looked like miniature figures in the distance. He floated on his back for a moment, enjoying the sensation of weightlessness and the early morning sun on his face. The sky was a brilliant blue, with just a few wispy clouds on the horizon. Days like this reminded him why he'd left behind the crowded streets and bitter winters of Chicago. Ryan took a deep breath and resumed his swim, planning to go another quarter-mile before turning back. He'd done this route countless times over the years, and it had become as routine as his morning coffee. As he swam, his mind wandered to his plans for the day. Maybe he'd call his sister in Tampa, or perhaps take his kayak out in the afternoon if the weather held. 50 yards further, Ryan felt a sudden shift in the water around him. It wasn't anything dramatic, just a subtle change in pressure, a different kind of movement beneath the surface. He paused again, treading water while scanning his surroundings. The surface appeared normal, just the gentle swells of the Gulf on a calm morning. But something felt off, triggering an instinctive unease that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. 300 yards away, beneath the surface, a 9-foot female bull shark cruised through the water with powerful sweeps of her tail. She had been in these coastal waters for several weeks, following schools of mullet and other prey fish that congregated near the shore during this time of year. Bull sharks were among the few shark species that could tolerate both saltwater and freshwater, allowing them to venture into shallow coastal areas and even up rivers where other sharks couldn't go. This particular shark had been pushed closer to shore than usual by a recent storm that had disrupted the normal patterns of the fish she hunted. At around 400 pounds, she was constantly on the move, needing to consume substantial amounts of food to maintain her energy levels. Her highly developed senses had detected movement in the water. The rhythmic disturbance created by Ryan's swimming strokes sent vibrations through the water that her specialized sensory organs could detect from hundreds of yards away. The shark changed course, moving with deliberate purpose toward the source of the disturbance. Her behavior wasn't driven by malice or hunger for human flesh as depicted in movies. Rather, it was a response to potential prey in her territory, to a shark unusual movement in the water, could indicate an injured or vulnerable animal, a potential meal. She accelerated slightly, her powerful muscular body propelling her forward with surprising speed for her size. Unaware of the approaching predator, Ryan decided to turn back toward shore. Something about the water didn't feel right, and he'd learned over the years to trust his instincts when it came to the ocean. He adjusted his course, aiming for the spot where he'd left his belongings on the beach. The shore seemed farther away than it should have been, and he realized the current must have carried him out a bit further than he'd intended to go. Ryan increased his pace, his arms cutting through the water with more urgency than before. He wasn't panicking, just exercising reasonable caution. The ocean deserved respect, and even experienced swimmers could find themselves in trouble if they weren't careful. The bull shark was now within 100 yards, her keen senses locked onto Ryan's movements. The vibrations in the water had become more erratic, signaling potential distress, exactly the kind of vulnerability that would trigger a predatory response. She rose slowly in the water column, moving from the deeper water toward the surface, where her target swam. Ryan felt a sudden powerful surge in the water behind him, like a strong underwater current. He turned to look back, but saw nothing unusual, just the vast expanse of the gulf stretching to the horizon. He returned his focus to the shore, now visible enough that he could make out individual people setting up their beach gear for the day. The lifeguard station was still empty, the red flag continuing its warning dance in the breeze. The first indication that something was wrong came when Ryan felt a large mass brush against his leg. The contact was solid, but quick, gone almost. As soon as it registered in his mind, his heart rate spiked immediately, adrenaline flooding his system. He knew instantly what it was. No fish or turtle would feel like that. The realization froze him for a split second before his survival instincts kicked in. The shark had approached from below, her gray-brown coloration blending perfectly with the sandy bottom. This was typical hunting behavior, an investigatory pass to assess potential prey. She circled back, moving a bit deeper in the water column, her dorsal fin occasionally breaking the surface as she prepared for a more definitive approach. Ryan forced himself to remain as calm as possible, remembering what he'd learned about shark encounters. Don't splash, don't panic, make deliberate movements. He began swimming toward shore with controlled strokes, fighting the urge to thrash wildly in a desperate attempt to reach safety. Every few seconds he scanned the water around him, trying to locate the shark. About 30 yards from Ryan, a silver flash caught his eye as the shark changed direction, turning in a tight arc before disappearing into the deeper water. His heartbeat thundered in his ears, drowning out the sound of distant voices from the shore. The beach seemed impossibly far away now, though in reality he was less than 200 yards from the shallows. When the attack came, it was swift and violent. The shark surged upward from below, her powerful jaws clamping onto Ryan's right leg just above the knee. The initial bite felt like an enormous vice crushing his thigh, a pressure so intense that for a brief moment his brain couldn't process it as pain. Then came the searing agony as hundreds of serrated teeth sliced through skin, muscle, and sinew. Ryan's scream echoed across the water as the shark shook her head violently from side to side, a behavior evolved to tear chunks of flesh from prey. The water around him immediately clouded with blood, turning a murky crimson that spread outward in tendrils. In a desperate act of self-preservation, Ryan swung his left arm down and struck the shark's snout with his closed fist, aiming for the sensitive area around the nostrils. The shark released her grip, momentarily confused by the counterattack, and disappeared into the bloodied water. Ryan gasped for breath, the pain now a white-hot flame consuming his leg. He knew he had only moments before the shark returned, or before blood loss incapacitated him. With every ounce of strength he possessed, he began swimming toward shore, his injured leg trailing uselessly behind him. On the beach, a middle-aged couple setting up their umbrella noticed the commotion in the water. The woman squinted against the sun's glare, then grabbed her husband's arm, pointing frantically toward the spreading red stain surrounding the struggling swimmer. "Oh my God, Frank! That person's in trouble. I think it's a shark attack," she shouted, already fumbling for her phone to call 911. Frank didn't hesitate. He sprinted toward the lifeguard station, hoping to find emergency equipment, even though no lifeguard was on duty yet. Finding it locked, he ran back toward the water, shouting to other early beachgoers for help. Ryan was fighting for his life, Each stroke took immense effort, the blood loss already making him lightheaded. The shark had disappeared from view, but he knew she was still nearby, likely circling beneath him, drawn by the blood trailing from his mangled leg. Every few seconds, he caught glimpses of the dorsal fin breaking the surface, sometimes closer, sometimes further away, as the predator assessed the situation. Frank and two other men, a jogger named Mark and a young fisherman called Tyler, were, now at the water's edge, preparing to go in after Ryan. They hesitated briefly, seeing the shark's fin circle the struggling swimmer. "We need to get him out of there now," Frank said grimly. "But that shark's still active." Tyler ran to his fishing gear further up the beach and returned with a large gaff hook. "I'll go in with this. You guys be ready to pull him out fast once I reach him." The three men waded into the water, Tyler in the lead with his makeshift weapon. By now, several people on the beach were calling emergency services, and in the distance, sirens could be heard approaching the beach access road. Ryan was barely conscious when he felt hands grasping his arms. The shark had made 2 more passes, but hadn't attacked again. Unusual behavior that might have been due to his initial defensive strike or the increasing human activity in the water. Tyler kept the gaff hook ready, scanning the water for any sign of the shark's return as Frank and Mark began pulling Ryan toward shore. "Stay with us, buddy," Mark urged as Ryan's head lolled backward. "Help's coming, just hang on." The journey to shore seemed to take an eternity, though it was less than a minute before they reached water shallow enough to stand in. Blood continued to pump from Ryan's mangled thigh, creating a crimson trail behind them. As they reached knee-deep water, 2 paramedics rushed into the surf to meet them, immediately applying a tourniquet to Ryan's upper thigh. "BP's dropping fast," one paramedic announced as they transferred Ryan onto a backboard. "We need to move." Now, as they carried him up the beach toward the waiting ambulance, Ryan drifted in and out of consciousness. Through the haze of pain and blood loss, he was vaguely aware of a crowd gathering, of hushed voices and pointing fingers. Someone was taking photos with a phone. A police officer was trying to keep people back, and somewhere behind him, in the Gulf's warm waters, the shark that had attacked him was already swimming away, disappearing into the depths as the morning sun continued its climb in the cloudless Florida sky. The ambulance tore through the streets of Clearwater, sirens wailing as the paramedics worked to stabilize Ryan. Inside, the scene was controlled chaos, an IV line delivering fluids to combat, shock, pressure bandages attempting to stanch the bleeding from his mangled thigh, and the constant urgent communication between the EMTs and the hospital trauma center awaiting their arrival. Male, early 30s, shark attack victim with massive trauma to the right thigh, the lead paramedic reported into her radio. Severe blood loss, BP 80/40 and dropping. ETA 7 minutes. Ryan floated in and out of consciousness, the world around him alternating between sharp, painful clarity and merciful darkness. During the brief moments of awareness, the pain was overwhelming, a burning, tearing sensation that seemed to consume his entire body, despite being localized to his leg. He caught fragments of conversation, medical terminology, urgent instructions, reassurances that seemed meant more for his benefit than reflecting the reality of his condition. "Stay with us, Ryan," a female paramedic urged, noticing his eyes fluttering open. Her name tag read Martinez. "We're almost at the hospital. You're going to be okay." Ryan tried to speak, but could only manage a weak groan. His mouth was dry, his tongue feeling swollen and foreign. The metallic taste of fear filled his throat. "Don't try to talk," Martinez instructed, checking the tourniquet on his thigh. "Just focus on breathing, nice and steady." The ambulance swerved sharply, throwing the medical equipment against the restraints that held it in place. Through the small window separating the patient compartment from the driver's cabin, Ryan glimpsed sunlight reflecting off buildings, trees flashing past, the blur of a city going about its morning routine, oblivious to the life and death struggle happening inside the speeding vehicle. At Clearwater Medical Center, the trauma team was assembled and waiting. Dr. Helen Wong, the attending trauma surgeon, reviewed the incoming information from the paramedics while her team prepared the resuscitation bay. "Shark attack with femoral artery involvement," she informed the assembled nurses, residents, and technicians. "He's going to need blood products immediately and will likely go straight to the OR. Let's be ready for anything." The ambulance screeched to a halt at the emergency entrance, and within seconds the back doors flew open. The hospital team swarmed around the gurney as it was unloaded, Martinez rattling off vital statistics and treatment administered as they rushed through the automatic doors. BP's still dropping despite 2 liters of fluids. Pulses thready at 1:30. GCS-12 on scene, now down to 9. They transferred Ryan to the trauma bay bed, a dozen hands immediately working in choreographed precision, cutting away his swim trunks, and Rashguard, attaching monitoring equipment, establishing additional IV access, preparing blood transfusions. Dr. Wong examined the wound quickly but thoroughly, her experienced eyes assessing the damage. "Definite femoral artery involvement," she announced. "Massive tissue loss to the quadriceps and hamstring. I'm seeing bone exposure. We need to get him to the OR now. Continue resuscitation en route." As they rushed Ryan toward the elevator, a hospital administrator approached quickly with a clipboard. "Do we have an ID on him yet? Any family contacts?" One of the nurses handed over Ryan's wallet. "Recovered from his beach towel by the police and brought in by a patrol officer who had followed the ambulance. Name's Ryan Mitchell, 32 years old according to his driver's license. Local address. No emergency contact information that we've found yet." In the operating room, the team worked with methodical urgency. Ryan was now fully unconscious, intubated and on mechanical ventilation, as the anesthesiologist carefully balanced keeping him under, while his body was in shock. Dr. Wong and her surgical team focused on the damaged leg, irrigating the wound to clear debris and assess the full extent of the injury. "The good news is the femur is intact," Dr. Wong noted as she worked, "but we've got extensive muscle damage and the femoral artery is partially severed. Multiple deep lacerations consistent with serrated tooth patterns." For the next 4 hours, the surgical team fought to save both Ryan's life and his leg. They repaired the femoral artery, painstakingly reconnected what muscle tissue could be, salvaged, and thoroughly cleaned the wound to prevent infection, one of the greatest risks following a shark bite due to the bacteria present in a shark's mouth. Throughout the procedure, units of blood continued to flow into Ryan's body, replacing what he had lost in the Gulf waters. As Dr. Wong finished placing the final sutures, she stepped back to survey their work. The leg was heavily bandaged with multiple surgical drains in place to prevent fluid buildup. The skin was pale where visible, a stark contrast to the healthy tan on the rest of Ryan's body. "He's going to have a long recovery ahead," she told her team as they prepared to transfer him to the intensive care unit. "But barring complications, he should keep the leg. Function will depend on physical therapy and how well the muscles heal." In the ICU, Ryan lay still, connected to an array of machines monitoring every aspect of his condition. The rhythmic beep of the heart monitor and the mechanical whoosh of the ventilator provided a steady soundtrack to the quiet efficiency of the nurses, checking his vital signs and adjusting medications. It was nearly evening when Ryan first showed signs of waking. His eyelids fluttered, and a small moan escaped his throat despite the endotracheal tube. The ICU nurse immediately moved to his bedside. "Mr. Mitchell, Ryan, can you hear me? You're in the hospital. You're safe now." Ryan's eyes opened fully, confusion and fear evident in their blue depths. He tried to move but found himself restrained by both weakness and the various tubes and wires connected to his body. Pain radiated from his thigh, despite the powerful medications flowing through his system. "Don't try to move," the nurse instructed gently. "You've been in an accident. You're in Clearwater Medical Center. The doctor will be here soon to talk to you." Ryan's eyes darted around the room, taking in the unfamiliar surroundings, the beeping machines, the sterile walls, the concerned face of the nurse leaning over him. Memory returned in disjointed flashes. The morning swim, the shadow in the water, the crushing pressure on his leg, the bloodied water. His heart rate spiked, setting off one of the monitoring alarms. "It's okay," the nurse reassured him, silencing the alarm. "You're safe now. Try to stay calm. Dr. Wong will be here shortly to explain everything." Dr. Wong arrived a few minutes later, clipboard in hand as she reviewed Ryan's vital signs. "Good evening, Mr. Mitchell. I'm Dr. Wong, the surgeon who operated on your leg. I'm going to remove your breathing tube now that you're awake and breathing well on your own. It will be uncomfortable for a moment, but then you'll be able to talk. On the count of 3, I need you to cough as I pull the tube out. 1, 2, 3. Ryan coughed weakly as the tube was extracted, then gasped at the raw sensation in his throat. A nurse offered him ice chips, which he accepted gratefully, the cool moisture soothing his irritated airway. "Shark," He managed to croak after a moment, his voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Wong nodded. Yes, you were attacked by a shark while swimming. You've suffered a severe injury to your right thigh, but we've repaired the major blood vessels and cleaned the wound thoroughly. You lost a significant amount of blood, but you're stable now. My leg? Ryan asked, afraid of the answer but needing to know. Still attached, Dr. Wong replied with a small smile. And with proper rehabilitation, you should regain good function. You were fortunate. The bite missed your femoral artery by millimeters, a few centimeters difference, and you might not have made it to shore alive. Ryan closed his eyes briefly, absorbing this information. When he opened them again, he asked, How long? I've been here about 12 hours now. The attack happened this morning. As for recovery time, you're looking at several months of healing and physical therapy, but you're young and in excellent physical condition, which will help significantly. Ryan nodded slightly, then asked, Has anyone been notified? My sister. The police found your phone and wallet on the beach. They've been trying to contact your family. If you feel up to it, you can give us the information now and we'll make sure your sister knows what's happened. Ryan provided his sister's contact information, and a hospital social worker was dispatched to make the call. Left alone momentarily, Ryan stared at the ceiling, trying to process the events that had so dramatically altered the course of what should have been an ordinary day off. The attack itself already felt like a nightmare, vivid, but somehow unreal, as though it had happened to someone else or in a movie he had watched rather than lived through. Outside his room in the ICU waiting area, activity was building. Word of the shark attack had spread quickly through local news and social media. 2 local television reporters had already attempted to gain access to interview Ryan, but had been firmly turned away by hospital security. A police officer was stationed nearby, partly to maintain order, and partly to take Ryan's statement when he was well enough to provide one. Ryan's sister, Melissa, arrived in a rush of worry and relief 2 hours later. She had been at work in Tampa when the call came, and had left immediately, driving well above the speed limit the entire way to Clearwater. The hospital staff directed her to the ICU, where she was briefed by Dr. Wong before being allowed to see her brother. He's very lucky to be alive, Dr. Wong explained gently. The people who rescued him from the water applied a tourniquet quickly, which likely saved his life. He's still weak from blood loss and surgery, so please keep your visit brief. He needs rest more than anything right now. Melissa nodded, wiping tears from her eyes as she followed a nurse to Ryan's bedside. She barely recognized her vibrant, active brother in the pale figure lying amid the tangle of medical equipment. His tanned face was now ashen, his usually bright eyes dulled by medication and trauma. Ryan, she whispered, taking his hand carefully to avoid disturbing the IV line. Oh God, Ryan. He turned toward her voice, a weak smile forming on his lips. Hey Mel, sorry to scare you. You idiot, she said through tears, squeezing his hand. Swimming alone at dawn with a shark warning in effect? What were you thinking? Clearly I wasn't, he admitted, his voice still rough from the breathing. Tube. Won't make that mistake again. Melissa stayed until the nurses insisted she leave, promising to return first thing in the morning. As she left, she encountered the waiting police officer, who asked if Ryan was able to give a statement. Yet, she directed him to the nursing staff, who determined that Ryan was still too weak for formal questioning. Through the night, Ryan drifted in and out of sleep, the pain medications creating a foggy barrier between consciousness and dreams. When he did sleep. His mind replayed the attack in vivid detail, the sudden pressure on his leg, the cloud of blood in the water, the desperate struggle to reach shore. He would wake with a jolt, momentarily disoriented, until the steady beeping of the monitors and the antiseptic smell of the hospital room brought him back to reality. Morning brought a new shift of nurses, a visit from Dr. Wong to check his surgical site, and the arrival of Officer James Perkins from the Clearwater Police Department. Mr. Mitchell, Officer Perkins began after introducing himself, I know you're still recovering, but if you feel up to it, I'd like to take your statement. About what happened yesterday? Ryan nodded, adjusting his position slightly with a wince. I can try. For the next 20 minutes, Ryan recounted the events of the previous morning. His arrival at the beach, his decision to swim despite the posted warnings, the sensation of the shark's presence before the attack, and the details of the attack itself. As best he could remember them. It was a bull shark, he stated with certainty. I've seen them before from boats. This one was probably 9 feet long, maybe 400 pounds. Female, I think, based on the size. Officer Perkins took detailed notes. And you were aware of the shark advisory that had been issued? Ryan hesitated, then nodded. Yes, I saw it on the news the night before, and the red flag was up at the lifeguard station. I've swum there hundreds of times without incident. I thought the risk was minimal. I understand, Officer Perkins said, his tone neutral. We're not here to assign blame, Mr. Mitchell. We're gathering information to file an official incident report and to determine if any additional safety measures need to be implemented. After Officer Perkins left, Ryan was visited by Dr. Sandra Keller, a marine biologist from the Florida Marine Conservation Institute who worked with local authorities on shark-related incidents. Mr. Mitchell, I'm Dr. Keller, she introduced herself. I specialize in shark behavior and human-shark interactions. If you're willing, I'd like to ask you some questions about your encounter to add to our research database. Ryan agreed, and Dr. Keller pulled up a chair beside his bed. Based on your description and the wound pattern, I believe you're correct that it was a bull shark. They're one of the 3 species most commonly involved in attacks on humans, along with great whites and tigers. Why did it attack me? Ryan asked, the question that had been haunting him since he regained consciousness. Dr. Keller considered her response carefully. Sharks don't hunt humans. That's a common misconception perpetuated by films and sensationalist media. Bull sharks in particular are investigating when they bite. Unfortunately, their investigatory behavior involves their mouth, which is filled with rows of serrated teeth designed for tearing flesh. She continued, you were swimming alone, potentially in an area where the shark was already hunting fish. The irregular movement of a human swimmer can mimic the movements of an injured fish or seal, natural prey items. The shark was likely investigating what you were, not actively hunting you as prey. Then why did it let go? Ryan asked. I hit it on the nose, but I didn't think that would actually work. Dr. Keller smiled slightly. You did exactly the right thing. Sharks have sensitive electroreceptors around their snouts called ampullae of Lorenzini. A solid strike to this area can disorient them temporarily. Plus, once the shark got a taste, it realized you weren't its usual prey. Contrary to popular belief, sharks don't particularly like the taste of humans. We're too bony and don't have the high fat content they prefer in their diet. This information provided Ryan with a strange sort of comfort, the knowledge that he hadn't been specifically targeted, that the attack wasn't personal, but merely an unfortunate case of mistaken identity in the shark's world. What happens to the shark now? He asked. Nothing, Dr. Keller replied frankly. We don't hunt down sharks that have been involved in attacks. They're essential apex predators that maintain the health of marine ecosystems. The beach has been temporarily closed as a precaution, but the shark is likely miles away by now, continuing its normal patterns of movement and feeding. Throughout the day, Ryan received visits from hospital staff, his sister, who brought him his phone and some personal items from his apartment, and a physical therapist who explained the long road to recovery that lay ahead. By evening, he was exhausted, the emotional processing of the attack taking as much toll on him as the physical trauma. As night fell, Ryan scrolled through his phone, discovering that his attack had made not only local news, but had been picked up by several national outlets as well. There were even blurry photos taken from the beach, showing him being carried from the water, the sand stained red with his blood. The coverage ranged from factual reporting to sensationalist headlines about killer sharks stalking Florida beaches. He set the phone aside, disturbed by the coverage and the way it portrayed the shark as a malevolent monster rather than a wild animal acting on instinct. Despite being the victim, he felt a strange sense of responsibility to correct the narrative, to emphasize that he had been in the shark's territory, ignoring posted warnings, and that the animal had been doing what millions of years of evolution had designed it to do. Ryan drifted off to sleep with these thoughts circling in his mind, the pain medication finally pulling him into a dreamless rest. Outside his window, the Florida night was alive with the sounds of the city, distant traffic, the occasional siren, the rustle of palm trees in the ocean breeze, and miles away, in the dark waters of the Gulf of Mexico, the bull shark that had forever altered the course of his life continued her silent patrol of the coastal waters, unaware of the impact of their brief, violent encounter. The next morning marked 36 hours since the attack. Ryan awoke to find Dr. Wong checking his wound, carefully removing the surgical dressings to assess the healing process. "Looking good so far," she commented, examining the long line of sutures that traversed his thigh. "No signs of infection, which is our primary concern with shark bites. The antibiotics seem to be doing their job." Ryan raised himself slightly on his elbows to look at his injury for the first time. He was unprepared for the sight. A massive curved wound that wrapped around nearly half his thigh, the edges neatly stitched but the overall shape clearly resembling the arc of a large shark's jaw. The surrounding tissue was deeply bruised, displaying an array of purple, blue and yellow discoloration that extended well beyond the actual bite. "Jesus," he whispered, falling back against his pillow. Until this moment, the reality of what had happened hadn't fully registered. The stark visual evidence of how close he had come to death made his stomach tighten. "The scarring will be significant," Dr. Wong acknowledged, carefully reapplying clean dressings. "But as I said, you're fortunate. The bite missed major arteries and nerves. With proper physical therapy, you should regain close to normal function." "When can I leave the hospital?" Ryan asked, already feeling confined by the sterile walls and constant monitoring. "Not for several more days at least," Dr. Wong replied. "We need to ensure there's no infection developing and that you're strong enough to manage at home. Shark bites have a high risk of unusual bacterial infections. Sharks' mouths contain bacteria that aren't commonly encountered in medical settings." Throughout the morning, Ryan received visits from various hospital staff, nurses changing his IV fluids, a nutritionist discussing his diet needs during recovery, and a hospital administrator dealing with insurance paperwork. His sister Melissa arrived around noon, bringing him a change of clothes for when he would eventually be discharged and a stack of magazines to help pass the time. "You've made quite a splash," she said, showing him a copy of the Tampa Bay Tribune with his story on the front page. The headline read, "Local man survives deadly shark encounter off Clearwater Beach." Ryan skimmed the article, which was mostly accurate but framed in dramatic terms that made him uncomfortable. "They're making it sound like Jaws," he commented. "The shark wasn't hunting me. It was just doing shark things." "Well, people love a dramatic story," Melissa replied, unpacking the items she'd brought. "Oh, and you should know that your phone's been blowing up. Everyone from local news stations to national morning shows wants an interview." Ryan grimaced. "I'm not interested in 15 minutes of fame for almost becoming shark food." "I figured you'd say that," Melissa nodded. "I've been declining on your behalf. But the hospital's PR person said to tell you that Inside Edition offered $5,000 for an exclusive." "Still no," Ryan said firmly. "I don't want to contribute to the killer shark narrative. It wasn't the shark's fault." By afternoon, Ryan was allowed to attempt standing for the first time since the attack, supported by a physical therapist and a walker. The pain was intense despite the medication, and he managed only a few seconds of bearing weight on his injured leg before needing to sit back down, sweat beading on his forehead from the effort. "That's completely normal," the therapist, a cheerful woman named Diane, assured him. "Your body has been through a massive trauma. We'll try again tomorrow, and each day it will get a little easier." Later that evening, as Ryan was finishing his dinner, hospital food that barely resembled the fresh seafood he was accustomed to cooking at home, he received an unexpected visitor, a middle-aged man with weathered skin and salt and pepper. Hair knocked hesitantly on his open door. "Mr. Mitchell, I'm Frank Donnelly. I was one of the guys who helped pull you out of the water." Ryan immediately set aside his tray. "Please come in. And it's Ryan. I owe you my life." Frank entered, clearly uncomfortable in the hospital setting. He carried a small gift bag which he placed awkwardly on the bedside table. "I just wanted to see how you were doing. My wife's been worried sick about you." "I'm alive thanks to you and the others," Ryan said sincerely. "The doctors said if you hadn't applied that tourniquet so quickly, I might not have made it to the hospital." Frank shrugged, embarrassed by the gratitude. "My wife's a nurse. She's always on me to keep current with first aid training. Never thought I'd actually need to use it." He gestured to the bag. "Just some magazines and snacks. Hospital food's terrible, I know from experience." They talked for about 20 minutes, with Frank recounting the rescue from his perspective, and Ryan filling in the gaps in his memory. Before leaving, Frank hesitated, then said, "Listen, my wife and I have this beach house rental business. Once you're back on your feet, we'd love to offer you a free weekend stay. beachfront private pool. Might help, getting back in the saddle. Ryan was touched by the gesture. That's incredibly kind. I might take you up on that, though. It might be a while before I'm ready to face the ocean again. After Frank left, Ryan settled back against his pillows, processing the conversation. The generosity of a complete stranger was a stark contrast to the sensationalist media coverage that seemed to care only about the dramatic aspects of his story rather than the human elements or the accurate portrayal of shark behavior. As night fell over Clearwater, Ryan found himself staring out the window at the distant lights of the city. Tomorrow would mark 48 hours since the attack, 2 days that had completely altered his perception of himself, his relationship with the ocean he loved, and his understanding of the wild creatures that inhabited it. In the quiet of his hospital room, with the rhythmic beeping of monitors his only company, Ryan made a decision. Once he was recovered enough, he would use his experience to educate others about shark behavior and ocean safety, not to spread fear, but to foster respect for these ancient predators and the marine environment they inhabited, an environment humans entered as visitors, not owners. Somewhere far offshore, beneath the dark surface of the Gulf of Mexico, the bull shark that had attacked him continued her solitary journey through the coastal waters. Neither villain nor victim, but simply a wild creature following instincts honed over millions of years of evolution. She would not remember their brief violent encounter, but Ryan Mitchell would carry the memory and the scars for the rest of his life. As he drifted toward sleep, Ryan's last coherent thought was not of fear or anger toward the shark, but a strange sense of connection to a world far older and more primal than the human civilization that existed on the shore. A world where he had been for a brief moment, not a tourist or an observer, but a participant in one of nature's most ancient dramas, the hunter and the hunted, the survivor and the survived. His heavily bandaged leg throbbed with his heartbeat, a constant reminder of his brush with mortality and the thin line that separated his world from the depths below. Tomorrow would bring more pain, more healing, more steps toward recovery. But for now, Ryan slept, his dreams filled not with teeth and blood, but with the endless blue of the ocean that, despite everything, he knew would always call to him.